Hello and welcome to another Sonic Talk special. We're very pleased to be able to talk to Halina Rice, who's there in a studio in London. How are you, Halina?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, for those of you who don't know, Halina's she's just done a live stream of her New Worlds project and the new track, which is Breaks. It's quite an interesting concept because each track is kind of accompanied by a 3D virtual reality visual sort of sound landscape that kind of it's almost each track is a concept album in its own right. I mean, it sounds like an awful lot of work. What brought the idea?
I think it sort of came about from basically I worked with a visuals designer called Jan Patirek, and I've worked with him for a while on and off. And in 2019, we were chatting about doing a live show, and we're pretty inspired by artists who, some of whom are musical with visuals, but some of whom are more visual artists who have music and sound with it. So people like Ryoji Ikeda, so the Test Pattern show, which I think is just coming back to London this year again. Also, there's a show called Beyond the Road, which was at Saatchi Gallery, which was curated by James Lavelle, where it was really about integrating visuals and sound to create an immersive experience for the audience. And Jan is a motion designer. He was working at the Royal College of Art, studying at the Royal College of Art while I was studying at Point Blank. And we were both really interested in this kind of concept, so creating this show. And we did a kind of hack together version of it at Abbey Road Studios at the end of 2019. We were lucky enough to be invited to perform at a hackathon event there. And then we were about to kind of move that forward, but then lockdown occurred. So in some ways, it's actually kind of a good thing in order to develop the project, because everyone started experience with live streaming and with virtual events, mixed reality. So it was actually a concept that we could take quite easily and develop further into something that we could do while we were locked down, since there was no opportunity for us to do it in a live space. So really that's where it comes from. It's sort of a little bit about a crossover between the music side and an arts experience, I suppose, that we want to create something that's emotive.
It's really interesting because I think with the whole VR, and we've seen it. There are many people who've taken a run at this and maybe not really pulled it off because it feels a bit disconnected. I mean, it's fine for when you're working at it, offline, but when you're doing it in real time, there's a disconnect, isn't there, because of the latency involved. But from what I've seen of certainly the live stream you did on April 23rd, it's really quite tied in. And I'm like, well, how the hell did you do that? Can I just play a little bit of that, just so there's some context? So this was the beginning of your event. So I guess there's that bottom corner is you live, and then this is the space. But there's this figure that I don't know how you do it, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that later. So the idea is what you're doing there live in wherever you are in your house or in a studio space is reflected in this 3D character that was in the 3D space, but is happening in real time. And particularly when you start playing the drums, I don't know if I'll see if I can cut this in. Let me see if I can find the drums bit. Excuse me if I fast forward. Yeah, there we go. So the latency is astonishing. Now, I'm not expecting you to kind of go to any to reveal any secrets, but how on earth did you manage to do it? Are you being scanned in real time somehow? How is that working?
Yeah, yes, that's right. So the basic setup, and I should sort of talk about the other part of this journey, was I was lucky enough to go to Ableton Loop conference in Berlin in 2017. And the closing show was of an electronic artist called No Such Thing and a digital artist called Kujiro Takahashi. And again, I had the same sort of sense of awe and wonder because they were performing live in front of us, but were projected in real time behind them, and with the camera kind of panning around. And I just, for the life of me, couldn't understand, because I couldn't see a camera that was panning that could be so far away and do these sort of glorious kind of pullback shots. So we took some time to really have a look into what they were doing. So it was Connect, basically. So you have Connect, Xbox Connect cameras. They're effectively taking a point cloud of your body. And of course, within that, the Connect can reiterate, take that point cloud and then look at the point cloud sort of from different angles. In the case of Kajiro Takahashi, is like a master of doing this. He's actually got 3 that he's managed to knit together. So ours is relatively simplistic. And then the part that creates the visual environment, we're working in Unity 3D.
Right,
so it's a gaming software program. So there's a variety of sort of prominent engines, but that's one of them. So Jan, the visual designer, can create whatever environment, and then the kind of magic part is how to knit the Connect information into the Unity project. And for that, I sort of randomly just put a call out on a freelancer website because I didn't know anyone who could do it, and it was picked up by an agency in Armenia called Eclectic, and who are great guys, really supportive, and they do a lot of work in augmented reality and gaming. So they help create the sort of basic project that's got the coding that means that I will stay in position with the Unity environment while Jan can create these kind of cinematic sweeping camera movements around me. And then we can just use that in any creative format, and we can put multiple instances of me in the environment.
Wow, okay.
So that's the first thing. And when you talk about latency, it's funny because that's one of the first things that wasn't right about the first performance that we did with Spheres is we, at that point, I think we were using Listen to the web app to translate it directly because I do the music on a MacBook. The MacBook wouldn't be able to cope with the audio and the amount of visual processing that's being done. So I have a high-spec PC as well. So I have to get the sound from the MacBook into the PC and then out through OBS to live stream to YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, etc. So as long as the audio and the visual meet up, that's cool. And then there'll probably be there's some latency going into delay going out.
If it all arrives to the audience at the same time, that's okay, right?
Exactly. And initially the trials that we listened to were a little bit late. It just wasn't kind of matching up. So now we just wire it through 2 sound cards. So the audio is going out from the MacBook into one sound card. It's going into another sound card attached to the PC, and then all kind of uniting together. And that seems to work well for us. So the whole project has been like a series of head scratching challenges.
Well, just as an aside there, have you thought you could also use NDI audio, which is network video and audio, and you could run that over the network and that would work? That's designed to be very low latency, and that's open source, so that might work exactly. Well, not open source, but easily accessible, cross-platform. But that's beside the point. So let's rewind a little bit because, that'll satisfy, no doubt, the people who are really into video tech and that side of things. But our audience are also really interested in the music technology that's going on here. I mean, you mentioned being at Point Blank, and I noticed looking back at your kind of your release history that you didn't start releasing like until 2015, but presumably you were interested in music and music technology and creating before then. What's that sort of journey? Were you a kind of child pianist and then was it the standard route, or did you have something slightly different going on there?
I think it's interesting because I did do piano. We had a piano in the house. Both my grandmothers played the piano, and one of them bought us a piano, and I really took to it. And I did the classical training through all the grades when I was at school, but I always feel like I had a second education, which was my brother had the Beatles' complete guitar chord book, and I think he showed me how to pick out how to do chords. So octave in the left hand, chords in the right hand on the piano. So to kind of start recreating songs I liked, it was learning to not do it by musical notation, but just to be able to read off, well, what's a G7, what's a sus4, etc., and sort of fill in the notes in between. And I think my interest was always being trying to work out things I heard on the radio or wherever, or from cassettes on by ear, just to kind of understand. I guess that gave me a sort of grounding in harmonically what a song was doing, where it was moving, or what was the bit that made you kind of feel emotional about the song, because it's often grounded in the harmony. I saw a really interesting video on the song All By Myself the other day.
Is that the Celine Dion?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And about the harmonic integrations and how actually, and quite openly, it's a rip-off of some Rachmaninoff, I think. But it's actually really quite complex inside, and you think, gosh, and that's what's sort of moving you, I guess. So I feel like I had the sort of classical side, and then the sort of non-classical side. I also became interested in music by people like Gershwin, etc. Kind of when I was 11 or 12, which again I think is all about interesting harmonic progressions.
It's very bombastic as well, Gershwin, though, isn't it? I mean, there's some of those, because it's orchestral versions of sort of slightly bluesy, sort of, at the time it was quite controversial, wasn't it, the way that he put all of stuff together, because it was, you know, it was I suppose, not white culture music, and that was kind of a bit of a taboo thing. And but Gershwin, some of the stuff, I mean, Rhapsody in Blue, got to be one of the finest pieces ever, right?
Completely. And I heard that piece on a television program, and I didn't know what it was. I asked my dad, and luckily he knew what it was, and very obligingly, I wasn't at the standard, but I asked him to buy me the piano music for it. And again, it was just kind of like, how are these harmonies being created? So I was sort of getting my sort of hands around that on the piano. Yeah.
It's really interesting, actually, because, I mean, you say you went through the grades, which is quite, I mean, it's quite a formal education, that, isn't it? And I've spoken to a number of musicians who have quite a strong formal education, but they've managed to somehow, because it's quite easy to stay on the logical formal way and not maybe connect to things emotionally in terms of compositional skills. So when did you start making your own music? I mean, what led you to be doing that, and how did you first do it?
I'm not sure. I think I just always did. I found some music the other day I'd written called Major E Flat and His Ragtime Band, because I was quite into ragtime when I was about 10 or 11.
Hard to play.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, I was always making up tunes. I think at school, I wrote little songs. So one of my friends sang really well, so I'd write songs for her to sing. And I just enjoyed kind of improvising a little bit on the piano. And I had 2 cassette decks, and I'd do sort of tape to tape and experience levels of hiss noise, like further and further. I didn't know how to eliminate that. But I used to record either myself singing multiple times or with different instruments, etc., in the house. So I studied music through to A level, and then as a first year subsidiary subject when I went to university. But I was there with a lot of technically very excellent musicians, and I wasn't a classical and technical musician. So, or maybe I just didn't see it, but I didn't really see a pathway through to me doing music in a professional sense. Following university, I just got a much more ordinary job and had that for a long time. But in the background, I was always playing, always composing, and played in a couple of bands, played in a David Bowie tribute band for a bit.
Good way to learn. I mean, some of that stuff's actually very musically advanced, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and fantastic piano parts as well.
Yeah.
And I guess sort of growing up, I'd been sort of into the indie band side. So in our household, it was things like my brother would be listening to Pink Floyd, my sister would be listening to the Cocteau Twins. Peter Gabriel was a big influence, and I was fascinated by the sound design. And again, I wouldn't be able to name it as that at the time, but I was really interested in the sort of slightly weird and unnerving sounds.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because your music has, the term eclectic is used quite a lot, and there is quite a lot of eclecticism, if that's even a word. I don't know, but I mean, because you're going from this sort of almost sort of Euro pop of Drive, almost. I say, it's still got a very unusual twist to it, through to the later tracks in the New Worlds project, which are very atmospheric, but also some of them quite aggressive and beaty. I mean, but still quite minimal. I mean, when did you start discovering, because there must have been that shift into electronic music? I mean, what did you how did you first create that stuff?
Yeah, so going to Point Blank, which is when I just finally decided I really need to learn about DAWs and about how to record music properly, coincided with me discovering electronic artists like John Hopkins, Nathan Fake, Rival Consoles, One Tricks Point Never. These kind of guys who were not writing EDM, straight EDM, but they were writing more interesting emotional versions, but still quite beat driven. Some of it's in relationship to kind of a Berlin style scene. And so I think, an influx of that influence started then coming out in the projects that I would write during my time at Point Blank. And I remember writing one and playing it to the class, and kind of the cool kid in the class said, "Yeah, I want to remix that." And I was like, "Great, this is a direction forward. This has worked." So, and that's when I kind of took my work to Point Blank as an EP, and was lucky enough to have them publish the EP.
So they kind of encourage you to sort of come out, as it were, and sort of show your stuff to the world.
Yeah, I think I was fairly proactive in knocking at the door and saying,
right, okay,
please can you do this? But I was quite surprised that they were fairly happy to put it out pretty much as it existed. So that was the EP Prim, which came out in 2015.
And from what I'm reading, some good critical acclaim, and people seem to dig it. And there were a couple of remixes done, and it started the whole ball rolling. I mean, were you playing live at that point? Is that something that you kind of did, or were you still very much all in the box? Or maybe you weren't in the box. I'm making an assumption there, but I'm guessing, because you were working in live. Was that what you were choosing at the time, the DAW? Right, okay.
Yeah, I'd started in Logic at Point Blank, and then I made a translation into Ableton Live after I finished the diploma. And then I'd always sort of had a vision of wanting to do something in a live environment. So 2016 was when I first played live, kind of as this project. And generally speaking, it was just around the sort of small electronic networks around London. So there's places like Plugged and Crux that regularly put on electronic producers and performers. And the audiences are often made of enthusiasts. So it's quite a forgiving environment, because people are just interested to give you space to test and learn and trial. And so I think that's kind of been good, because over the years, even the last year, the setup keeps on changing and keeps adapting as you try and move towards, I guess, the vision or the goal of what you want to play for an audience.
So, I mean, are you using? I noticed from the stuff I've seen, you've got push going on there, and there's obviously a sample playback or pads, so you're playing beats and whatnot. I mean, are you using hardware synths in your world, or are you working much more in the box?
And I think every track is generally a mix. So on the hardware side, the one piece I use is this, which is an SEO2. It's from Roland and Studio Electronics, which is a little analog synth in their boutique series. But it also has digital settings. So if you find a patch that you really like, you can store it easily, and you don't have to spend hours trying to re-find it. So that was used for the bass line in Breaks. Pretty much all the synth lines in Terrain came from that synth. And I think it's nice to use a piece of physical equipment because it's very hands-on. So the modulation I'm kind of performing, I guess, into Ableton Live and recording the audio out of the back of that. So so there's that, and then that will be combined with just samples, and sometimes samples from libraries, which I'm frequently cutting up and adding effects over. So they're multiply treated, I guess, before I finish with them. And then there's little bits like there's some vocal work. So sometimes I'm using my voice or singing, but I use a plugin like Pulse Stretch, so Extreme Sound Stretch.
Okay. That's old school. I mean, that's been around for years. I remember doing a topic on Pulse Stretch, didn't they? Somebody stretched Justin Bieber down to kind of minus 4,000%. And I'm not casting any aspersions on it, but it sounded beautiful, or perhaps more beautiful, whichever way you prefer to take. But interesting. But is that offline still? That's quite an offline process, isn't it? The Pulse Stretch stuff, or do they do it?
It's interesting. A friend of mine started using it as a plugin, but yeah, I use the kind of offline. So I do that and then create WAV files and then import them into the projects. But yeah, as you say, it just makes everything sound beautiful and like it's in a cathedral. So yeah, so I use that a lot, often just to sort of effect and a little bit of background ambience, I guess.
Well, the other thing that I noticed, I was doing a little bit of research about like interviews and your influences and your you're often mentioning, the sound design. The sound design seems to be a really big deal for you. I mean, it's straightforward. One can write a song with a guitar and a piano, but it seems like sonically, it's the most. It's a very important aspect to it. Do you spend a lot of time on that? I mean, I'm suspecting you must do, because your tracks are often quite deceptively simple, but have a certain. There's a real sort of uniqueness to the sound world they inhabit.
Yeah, it probably is the crux of everything I do. So when I first did the Redux album, it was actually all non-vocal. It was actually fully complete as an album with no songs or lyrics or melodies at all. That's how the album was originally intended. What actually happened was that the guy who ran the record label heard me singing over it at a gig and then just said, "Do you want to redo this with vocals?" So another 6 months down the track, was when we released it once we've done that. So I think, the heart of what I do is always from an exploration and sort of test and learn of sound, really. That's the thing that I'm really interested in and enjoy playing around with. So I just like new things. I love new plugins. I like to press all the buttons. I think you easily get lost down rabbit holes of trying things, but just every now and then you get a kind of weird happy accident and something that you just think, gosh, I wouldn't even have thought of making that, or that sounds like an instrument that kind of doesn't exist. And then I'll take that and sort of try and move it around and arrange it, and then maybe add things that are a little bit more standard, whether it's beats or bass or whatever, to kind of give a structure at the background to the sounds. But yeah, often the sounds are the sound design is almost more primary than it might be for other producers, I suppose.
And is there stuff that you reach for? Do you have a kind of, do you discover something new and then generally, you explore that until you've discarded it and then find something new? I mean, what are you currently juiced on?
So things I like the moment. So there's a couple of plugins that I really love at the moment. One called Morph, which basically takes two sound sources and one can borrow the characteristics of the other. So you have like an XY pad, and you can make them literally kind of morph together into a totally new sound. So that I find really interesting. Another plugin that someone showed me the other day is called Texture, and it's about bringing noise to a track. So a lot of people might do this kind of a little bit more by hand at the moment, by having maybe another track of noise and then side chaining or ducking with the white noise. But this is almost kind of doing the job for you. It's on your audio track and it will apply. So you can just make something sound entirely different. And I think that's the thing that I like is you might take a sample that just sounds a little bit standard, and you apply one of these plugins and it just turns into something you never heard and no one's ever heard. So it's kind of a bit more interesting.
When you're working on a track, I mean, are you one of those people that is kind of, you work on it, and you're sort of mixing as you go along, and then suddenly it's finished? Or do you have very distinct processes between creation and mixing?
I usually start with sketches. So I open up quite a lot of sandpit files. So I have multiple sandpit Ableton projects. And usually it's just about getting an idea, or it's a plugin that I'm playing with, or some sound ideas, or maybe sometimes it's an inspiration. Like I've heard another producer do something, I'm like, I wonder how they do that. And inevitably, what I do doesn't sound anything like what they've done, because I'm possibly not good enough to copy it. But they'll just be sort of ideas in isolation, and then you'll just go through a process of saying, well, this is something that's worth taking to the next level. So that might become an initial sketch. And then often I'll sit on those sketches for quite a long time before picking them up again, or even playing them live in some instances. So Breaks, for instance, was part of a live set already, and it was being picked up by people, and people were saying, okay, is that released, or where can I hear that? So it then became a kind of natural choice to actually work it up to the next standard. But then I'll go through multiple iterations of the project in order to get to the sort of final arrangement and mix. I think this year I've definitely been trying hard to be, so for Redux I did all the creative mixing, but the very final sonic mix, as it were, what was done by another mix engineer,
right?
Because I just at the time didn't have the skill set to get it to that level. But this year I've definitely sort of pushed myself, so which is why I had to do it multiple times, because even when someone else does something for you, it's never quite what you envisioned or the sound that you wanted.
I was going to say, I mean, letting that creative control go, particularly when you it's not like you've just strummed a guitar on and go, okay, but I've written the basic song, somebody else go and arrange it. I mean, you inhabit the entire thing, so giving it over to somebody else is bound to be really difficult, right?
And I think it's fine sometimes to know what you're good at and what other people are good at, and also to understand that other people's ears can hear things, because you get tired hearing the same thing again and again. So other people can hear things that you can't hear anymore, and that's good. But still, there'd just be small things that just wouldn't be in tune with what I felt the sonic universe should be. So I still absolutely bounce tracks against kind of people that I trust to give me good and constructive feedback, because I know I can get things wrong in terms of the mix. Sometimes it's good also to hear it in different rooms on different speakers. Yeah. So I try and do that. But both for that and for speed as well, it's best to do it all yourself, I think. Or for me, it's best to do it all myself and then pass it over for mastering.
So do you mix, I mean, because you're talking about performing live, and I'm guessing you listen to a bunch of stuff in a kind of club or a large amplified environment. What do you mix for? Do you mix for the phone, the earbuds, or that vibey room where you can hear it really loud?
That's a really interesting question. I think I actually mixed for headphones to start with. It felt like it should just be something that you would be in a world of your own with. However, the next stage of the project is to try and go to a live environment. So I'm currently working with a guy who to pitch for spaces, particularly spaces that have been left empty, like retail spaces, etc., to do maybe a series of live events. And the vision of that is what would sound amazing in a space where you've got visuals maybe surrounding you. So for the audience, it's how do I kind of envelop them in a sort of sonic and visual experience.
So it's interesting, because of the way that the Unity engine works, it's very much of a sort of gaming thing. And not only does it deal with visuals, it deals with audio, particularly proximity and surround and that kind of thing. Is that something that you're interested in getting involved with? I mean, in fact, have you worked in the gaming world as well? Because you're sort of halfway there, right?
Well, it's interesting in terms of the surround sound aspects. For the show we did at Abbey Road, it was in conjunction with Acoustics, who also have the Elisa lab nearby in Highgate, who do this sort of really beautiful high-end surround sound system, which has their own sort of special software. So over the course of a few days, I worked with their engineers to reprogram the set that we were doing, so we could actually literally make sounds sort of spin round Studio 2, which was like incredible. But we only actually, because I didn't have the ability to hear it at home, because of course we don't have the setup, always the first time we heard it was in live performance.
Yeah.
But it was a hackathon, so the spirit was, test it and learn. But really, really interesting first experience of that technology. And I know there's more and more venues that are beginning to invest in those kind of sound systems. So Earth at Hackney is a big venue that has the Acoustics surround sound system in it.
Ah, interesting. But there's also, I mean, there's headphone technology now, isn't there, that will allow you to simulate back to front and kind of up and down. So you can kind of start to bring that into play. I mean, I know there's all sorts of head tracking and, the VR headsets, they have all of that built into them. So I'm guessing you could probably inhabit that world as well, rather, because, I mean, that's quite exclusive. If you can't make it to the venue, you're sort of, that's it. You can't come in. You can't experience it.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, and there's a whole explosion obviously around the kind of 8D binaural side. I've done mixes before using the Sennheiser Ambio Orbit plugin to try, and so that was particularly for track drive, where we could kind of make the voices kind of spin in space. So it's not something that we've put our foot into as yet, but it's definitely an area to look at. I think that the one thing with VR is about headsets is how many people who are your audience would have those at the moment. If you actually do it in a live space, you have to provide, and there are many different ways of providing that kind of experience, including there's sort of things with glasses that have got speakers in them as well. But it's quite tech heavy.
Yeah.
And I think a little bit, the one thing that I felt, because we did have some discussions with respect to virtual reality, is that it starts to impact on the beauty and the emotion of an experience of the performance. And also the idea might have been at one stage, if I have a headset on and I'm performing, it just, for me,
are you there? Yeah.
Was the connection. Yeah. I sort of more want to create environments that people can be in or watch that are 3D and immersive, but feel natural to be in, so that it's not about being high tech or pushing that as a sentiment. It's about the emotion and the kind of beauty of the performance.
Right. So what's next for you? I mean, you've the New World project. I mean, you're 3 or 4 tracks into that now. How many? I mean, it's almost like each track is an album. I mean, I imagine a similar amount of work goes into it, because you've got all the visuals, you've got all of the other stuff. Which, at a time when there aren't necessarily the budgets for these kind of things, it's a labour of love to a degree. How do you see this progressing? Because I think the thing that I find really interesting about this is you're working now, artists, the overall concept being New Worlds, but each track is much more of an event than it's almost an album or an EP release in its own right.
Yeah, I think there's sort of several things that stream into that. One is about people's attention these days, which is a well talked about subject, which is, if you're not constantly releasing and being top of mind, there is so much content in the world. People don't necessarily do the wait for an album for two or 3 years anymore. They want to kind of keep hearing from the artist. So even very, very big artists will be dropping tracks on quite a regular basis. The second is that I've been learning this year. So every time I release, because I also run all the self-release sides, all the distribution and all the promotion, and luckily my background is also in digital and in marketing. So I'm kind of pushing quite heavily through social media advertising, for instance. So every time I do it, I'm learning about how to reach people. I'm also learning what track hits how. And if you just release one at a time, you really get a true feel. So interestingly, Spheres was quite experimental in nature, and it's very down tempo. So for something that's like streaming, it doesn't necessarily pick up hugely on streaming as much as a track like Terrain, which is fall to the floor immediately, and immediately kind of a familiar sound. Weirdly, it got picked up by a lot of people thinking that it was progressive house, which is not a genre that I would say that I could write in. And Danny Rampling found my Insta and then asked for the WABs and put it in his podcast. And it was really strange. I'd sort of suddenly attracted this completely different crowd of people who were saying this is a brilliant piece of trance as well. They thought it was trance. So it's like, well, that's really interesting that you read it like that. And Breaks is different again, and there's been nice feedback on the production side, but I don't think it doesn't go on streaming like Terrain went on streaming. So every time you do it, you learn a little bit about about how the production's sitting down, also how people are experiencing your sounds. Like you mentioned with Drive sounding like Europop, which is like
well, no, Euro, yeah, have that sort of Euro vibe to it because of the octave bass and the sort of pulse to it. That's all I meant, really. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. Honestly,
I know it's funny. A DJ from Fabric said that about it as well. I had the opportunity to play that out on Fabric. So yeah, not the intention, but that's it. Sometimes it's really interesting. You make stuff and people experience it in a very different way than you intended, but it's almost like it's none of my business.
Yeah, well, once it's out there, it's out there. So this process that you're kind of outlining, does it influence what you then think about would be the track after next or whatever? You think, actually maybe I'll follow. Does it influence your creative decisions, or you just deal with whatever comes out of your mind, and that's it's two separate sides to your job, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm aware that I'm not got a single sound as it were. But I think just because it's always me, then I guess there's always the character of me in it. And there's a degree to which I feel like I'm still evolving in terms of sound. So I'm happy just to I just do what I'm interested in at that point, or I don't think I have to write in a particular format. I don't, and I'm not a house or techno or any of these things. So I kind of like the liberty just to change and evolve and do something different.
Well, I guess that's as it should be anyway, and because as each track is an event, you can kind of do that. It doesn't have to have an overarching kind of obvious concept apart from it's you as the artist, which, as you say, is the important factor. Yeah. So what's next?
So next, actually, I may continue to keep doing single releases, but given that I've done 3 already, it may be a time to actually step back and think about a larger body of work, so maybe an EP or an album, and take a little bit of time and launch it maybe more properly in the autumn or even later. And in line with that, as mentioned, I'm looking at live spaces. So I definitely want to do this in a live environment. I want people in front of it to experience it, because that's what it's really meant to be about. It's meant to be about an audience, audio and visual experience.
Do you get a lot? Do you get a lot from the live experience? I mean, do you get the adrenaline and the kind of creative buzz? What is it about live that does it more for you?
I think it's the same as being an audience member in a live environment. You can't stop, you can't rewind, you can't just go and make a cup of tea. It's you're there and you're experiencing it. So everyone's part of the same experience. And if you've got a great sound system, then it's kind of
visceral.
Yes, it's very visceral. And I think everyone's said in the last year, everyone's missing that. Everyone's missing the kind of being together, and where possible, being too close together, spilling beer on each other's feet, and really feeling like there's a kind of unity and in the experience that you're having together.
Time to stick to the carpet together, I guess, in some ways. That's what we need. They're starting to do that in, I think it was in Manchester or Liverpool this weekend. They tested a 5,000 capacity live gig with music, which was just, and that. So I doubt if it's going to be long. You've just got to get on the waiting list, get the venue going, right?
Exactly that, and this is why we're sort of looking for bespoke venues where I can take them over and actually have a kind of lab, so I can bring creative directors, technologists in and experiment with the equipment, because you have to take a leap at one point. Like at the moment, it's in my house and it's too small to see what massive visuals would look like or what quality of projector I need. So I need to be in a place to. And I need to be able to experiment with that also before investing, because it's going to be quite a movement from, this setup took some investment, but the actual, but actually having a proper live rig with decent quality visual projections is going to be quite a big budget change as well. So it's almost like I need to take a leap for me as a business.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And start thinking about how it's achieved and how it also makes money at the end of the day. And it will have to make money in order to sustain if I want it to sustain. So that's really what's on my mind at the moment. Is commercial enterprises.
What's next on the timeline in terms of, have you got more releases? Is this the last Breaks the last of the releases currently planned, or have you got more stuff? And if so, where can people find your stuff best?
So there's no releases currently planned. This is now into a sort of a writing break, as mentioned before, potentially a larger body of work. Although I have a commission to write for an Ableton-sponsored festival in June, where we are lucky enough to have some really amazing celebrity panelists who are women in the field of electronics. So that will be my next thing, is to write that commission. I'm also with the British Council going to be presenting my work along with 5 other UK artists to 6 artists who are based in LA, and then hopefully we're looking at collaborations between UK and LA. So there's a couple of kind of projects in the meantime, but as I say, it's going to be about writing and then thinking about what I do with that body of work and how I create a show off the back of it. And in terms of finding my stuff, it's probably Spotify or my YouTube channel is the best place to experience it.
Right. Well, I'll stick the coordinates up there at the end of this show. And I want to say, Halina, thank you so much for talking to us. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll be eagerly awaiting your next creative endeavours.
Thank you so much.